Hello and welcome. It's been a while since we've done a video. I thought it might be time to get another one out, and decided to do a little studio tour. That's what we're going to be looking at today. This is going to be a part one. We're just going to focus on the stuff that I've been using to work on this album, my new album. I am about 6 weeks into recording a new album. The album is tentatively titled Less Tentative Every Day, but until I'm sure, I'm not sure. But current working title, tentative title, is The Mechanics of Mysticism. I've got about 13 demos, jams, songs in progress. I don't know what you want to call them. We'll go over that a little bit here when I talk about the process that I've been using. While I've been talking here, I've just been kind of panning over. This is my main studio area. As you can see, it's kind of a mess. That's partially because I am in progress of recording. It's partially because I am a giant mess. And it's partially because I might be moving in the next 6 months, 3 months, 6 months to a year. And it makes me, obviously, if it's going to be a year or even 6 months, and I knew that, I would probably do the cleaning and reorganization that's necessary, but there's a chance it's within 3 months, in which case it seems dumb to break down the studio and rebuild it, only then I have to do that again a few weeks later. Because it's honestly, it's like probably take me 2 weeks of focusing on that to get it done. Okay, like I said, studio tour. This is part one. We've done the album announcement part. That should be coming out, I'm aiming for before Halloween. So let's say 2 weeks before Halloween is my current target. But yeah, let's get into the studio tour and talk about a little bit about the making of this album. My thought process on doing this is the last time when I did my module by module Eurorack breakdown, I got some comments on that. It was like, oh, cool, this is fun, this is neat, but what I'd really like to know is how you use all this stuff to make music. So that's what I'm going to focus on here, less on the gear and more on the process that I have been using. Okay, so enough panning around and setup. Let's talk about the studio. So right now, the brain of my studio, the heart, whatever you want to call it, the centerpiece of it is this MPC-1 right here. If you're not familiar with this piece of gear, it's kind of a DAW in a box. It's or like the ultimate groove box, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. It's got up to 8 tracks of audio, unlimited tracks of MIDI, and samples, up to 8 plugins at a time, and a bunch of synth plugins. I think comes natively with like 6 or 8, and then I've bought one other one, the FM synth, and you know it's an impressive piece of gear. I like it a lot. I don't quite love it. The lack of love comes from the fact that it's kind of buggy, and some things on it don't work very well. Has caused me to seek workarounds and additional gear and stuff like that. But all that said, for $700, $699 retail, I think you would be hard pressed to find a more capable piece of production gear. And if you are just getting into making music and you don't want to use a computer for some reason, or maybe your entire budget for the whole thing is $700, and you literally don't have another dime to spend, I think that the Akai platforms, particularly the MPC-1, which I think is sort of the best value, is really something to consider and look at. Workflow wise, on my last album, I developed. I decided to do my last album entirely within the MPC, and this one is also going to be essentially entirely within it. I might do some of the post production in the DAW, but I don't think I will. I think I'll be mixing, mastering, doing the whole thing in here. And I started working. So last album, I started working that way and developed a working workflow pattern of recording generally short 2 or 4 bar snippets, but sometimes longer, 8, 16, 32, even the entire length of a song, as samples, using them on a drum program. That's what they call it on the MPC. and arranging the samples that way. That worked pretty well, honestly. That's what I'm continuing to do this time, although the specifics of how we get there have changed a little. Last time as I was writing, I would record those 2 and 4 bar fragments. My writing process was sitting down, coming up with an idea, playing it in a few times, playing it a few times, then playing it in, recording it through tape as a sample, and then arranging it that way. And this time I'm working more on a little more spontaneous methodology, and still with the MPC at the heart of it. But right now, I'm mostly using the MPC as a kind of central exchange, and I'm using sometimes it's internal instruments, sometimes not. But as part of this little jam setup that I have, and we can go over that now too. We'll come back to the MPC probably at some point because there's more to discuss about it. But let's look at this jam stuff here. Turn this on. Okay, so let me just kind of pan over my jam setup. It starts here with this Launchpad Pro, Drum Brute Impact, the Hydrasynth, the MPC, the Make Noise O-Coast and Strega. And that's it. That is the core of my jam setup. So basically what I've been doing is the drums come from the drum machine, obviously. I think that's pretty obvious, but worth mentioning. The Hydrasynth has generally been doing my chords, although once or twice I did something else on it. It's a great polyphonic synth. Doing the chord work is one of its strengths, so that's what it's doing. The Strega and the O-Coast have been taken care of typically either lead or bass, or sometimes both. Sometimes I combine them into one instrument. Sometimes I use them as individual instruments, individual voices. And then I've been using the Launchpad to do most of my sequencing. And this brings us to the first weakness of the MPC, which is that its step sequencer is frankly ass. I've just not found it to be usable at all. Maybe if I spent more time with it, push past the blocks that I ran into with it, but it's pretty generally, this is not an opinion that I hold alone. Most people consider the step sequencer on the MPC one to be pretty unusable. My previous setup was centered around a Novation circuit, and I loved its step sequencer. So I went back and forth with rebuying a circuit, which I sold when I bought this current setup, or buying a Circuit Trax or Circuit Rhythm even, just for the sequencer, and maybe having it around as a little portable device to throw in my bag when I travel, or getting the Launchpad Pro. And what I settled on, obviously, since you see the Launchpad Pro here, was getting the Launchpad Pro. The reason I ended up with this is because I don't actually need the voice part of the Circuit Trax. I wasn't sure that the Circuit Rhythm sequencer was going to serve the same purpose, since it's 8 monophonic sequencers, and I do like to do my chords on this sometimes, at least some of the time. And it was really, I got this for $200, which was about as cheap, like even cheaper than the cheapest price you can find used Circuit Trax for. So it was kind of a no-brainer. And that's what I ended up with here. So my typical setup for this was I would set up 4 channels of sequencing on the Launchpad, although I rarely used more than 3 of them, and sometimes I only used 2, or even 1, or even none. But typically I use 2 or 3 channels of sequencing from the Launchpad Pro. It is plugged in via USB hub to the MPC. So I would sequence things on there, and then through the MPC, it then controls whatever synthesizer I have it plugged into. I'll get back to that in a second. Next, we have the Drum Brute Impact. That's, like I said, that's where I did my drums. So far, every drum sound on this album, I think there's one song, actually, that's not true. I used a bunch of sample drums. But every song so far on my jams that are going to get cut up and turned into songs has come from this. This is a great drum machine. The big realization I had during recording this, using a single drum machine, and using this drum machine in particular, was how nice it is in some ways to just have what you see is what you get. There's no setting up drum kits on this. There's no, is this kick better than that kick? Or let's listen to 50 snares and decide which one we like the best. It's what you see is what you get here. You got a kick drum channel, two variations on snare drums, which you can play together. One of them is a clap with when you use this color function. You get a high and a low tom. You get a cymbal and a cowbell, and you get hi-hat and open hi-hat, and you get this FM drum, and that's it. That's what you get. The FM drum is the most flexible. That's the one you can quote-unquote program the most. But even it is, there's 6 knobs. One of them's level. It's not a terribly complex system, and but it's very intuitive. It sounds pretty good for what it is. I don't know how many of these the raw drum tracks will make it onto the final album, but with some processing and additional beefing them up and whatever, I think they're going to provide a really good basis for what you're going to hear on the final album. Next, we have the Hydrasynth. This is pretty well known. Let me get these wires out of the way here. Pretty well known and beloved synthesizer at this point. It's been out for about 3 years. It's a very powerful, very programmable, very deep synthesizer. And yeah, so far it's just been basically using, providing my chords, except on a couple tracks where I got a lead off it or something like that. I like it a lot. I actually chose to use it this time. On the last album, this little guy right here, the Micro Freak, was my go-to, and I used it on every track, usually in multiple iterations. And so I didn't overuse it. I decided actually to set it aside for most of the recording and writing of this album, and then I'll pick it up when I get into the production phase, and we'll use it then. But in the meantime, I'm focusing on this guy right here, the ASM Hydrasynth. And I chose it as my kind of synth of focus this time because I wanted to really learn it better. I mean, I've had it for a year and a half, 2 years now, and I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface of it. In part because I stick with my go-to synth up there, and I have an Op6 too, which we're not going to go into this time, but which I got after and sort of had a little love affair with and yada yada. But anyway, I just thought this would be a good opportunity to really dive into the Hydrasynth, and it's been more than holding its weight. I'm definitely learning more about it, its tweakability, and how to use it in a mix and stuff. So it's been good. Okay. Then for some analog goodness, we've got the combo of the Make Noise Strega and O-Coast. Frequently running one into the other, specifically running the O-Coast into the Strega. But not always. Sometimes I use them separately. Sometimes I ran them together and then used them separately. Use these for a lot of bass sounds, a lot of lead sounds, some drones, some effects. It's very versatile and usable setup. And then I would that was my basic setup. Was these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of gear. So typically you'd have drum machine sequencer running itself, one channel of this running the Hydrasynth, one channel of this or 2 channels of it running Strega and or O-Coast. Then any other channels I would need, sometimes I would use a plugin or sample-based synthesizer, sample-based instrument, I should say, from the MPC. Or on a couple songs, I used the modular. On a couple songs, I used the Mini Brute 2S, and on 1 or 2, I used this guy right here, this Kawai K4, which is an old Rompler from back in the day. Yeah, see right now it's showing a OB Poly 2 bass. Yep, and that's basically up here. You can also see my patch bay. This got a lot of use, and this is my mixer / interface, the Model 12, Tascam Model 12, which is basically all the gear I'm going to go over for this session. The modular, if you want to know more about the modular, has its own video that kind of goes over it module by module. But yeah, so I would take this setup and come up with, usually I'd start with a drum pattern, maybe a bass line from there, and some chords, and I would jam. I was basically making jams, 4 to 6 track jams, jam out on them for 10 minutes at a time, record the jams into here. I typically did 2 jams for each setup. I find when I'm recording jams, it's good to get a couple variations, at least 2 variations, to make sure that you work out at least some significant portion of your ideas. And then my next stage, which I've just started into, is cutting those up into the MPC, recording, again, 2, 4, 8, 16, whatever bar loops, putting them in the MPC and doing arrangements in there. And that's where I'm at right now. Now, obviously, there's a lot of gear that we didn't go over, all these tape machines. I'm just going to do a quick, you can see there's a whole other section over here. My office is a mess, please forgive. And yeah, we'll get to all that stuff on part 2. I don't want this to go too long, and I think I've covered the basics here. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything I've gone over here, please let me know. I might throw up a few, jams on the YouTube here, so you can hear where I'm at. And yeah, I hope you found this interesting, and we'll talk soon. Bye.